Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Courageous Journey. My name is Paula Walters. This episode is Maybe I Was Never Broken. What healing is teaching me about shame, survival, and who I really am. I recently went to Texas to speak at the National Domestic Violence Hotline Conference. This should have been one of those moments where I felt like I've made it. I belong here. I was invited. I know my material. I've spent years doing this work. But I walked into that conference and started noticing everyone else, their degrees, their credentials, their titles, their organizations. And then I really started thinking, am I professional enough? Am I educated enough? Look at them. Look how beautiful they are. Look at me. And then I really started thinking to myself, do I really belong here? And eventually I had the realization, why am I standing in a room? Or why am I standing in a room I've already been invited to, trying to prove that I deserve to be there? And I realized this really wasn't about Texas or the conference or the people. It was about something that I have subconsciously done almost my whole entire life. I have spent so much of my life feeling the need to prove, to work harder, to take another shift, help more people, learn more, do more, be more useful, be more needed, look better, accomplish something else, keep people happy. Don't disappoint anyone. And underneath, so much of that was, am I enough yet? When things went wrong, I often didn't ask what happened here. I asked, what is wrong with me? And so my question for the people listening to this is, how many of us have things that we believe about ourselves today that were actually taught to us by somebody else? And that is where shame becomes a huge part of this conversation that I'm reflecting on this week. Guilt says, I did something I regret. Shame says, there is something wrong with me. Survivors can carry shame about what happened, staying too long, the people that we trusted, unhealthy coping, relationships, our reactions, our bodies, careers, education, parenting, things that we did while we were just trying to survive. Taking responsibility for something I've done is not the same as making that thing my identity. I can say, I did things I wish I had done differently without saying I am a terrible or broken person. And that's why one question has started changing the way I see my entire life, the person I used to be, and the person that I am trying to become. For years, I really got stuck. I got stuck in what is wrong with me? Relationally, medically, spiritually, emotionally. All parts of me wondered that. And now I'm learning to ask, what happened to me? What did I learn because of what happened to me? Did that response once protect me? And do I still need that response to apply today? That completely changes the conversation for me, because suddenly some of the things that I hated about myself are starting to really make sense. And this is where understanding trauma, the brain, and the nervous system become so important for me. And that is why I centered all of the things that I'm doing around this pillar. Because maybe some of my flaws were me learning adaptations. Why did I notice tiny changes in people's moods? Maybe because noticing those changes once mattered. Why did I desperately want people to like me? Maybe because acceptance became connected to safety. Why did rejection feel so big? Why did I stay for too long? Why did I work myself into the ground? Why did I struggle with trust? Why did I feel like I constantly had something that I had to prove? And for years, my answer was because something's wrong with me. And now I understand many of those behaviors had a story. A survival response isn't automatically a personality flaw, because trauma doesn't just only leave us with memories. Our brains and our bodies learn from what happened to us. Trauma can affect like our threat detection, our ability to pay attention, our memory and our memory recall, our emotional regulation, our relationships, how quickly and appropriately we react to things, how easily we can come back to baseline or settle after we get stressed. And actually, it can impact how safe we feel in general. Sometimes our bodies begin responding before our thinking or rational brain fully even understands why. And sometimes it's even completely out of emotional brain response and completely out of the rational brain. A tone, a facial expression, silence, conflict, rejection, a smell, a sound, a particular situation. Sometimes your brain isn't responding only to the room you're standing in. It's responding to history. When I was in Texas, I took people on a journey. If you've been to one of my trainings or one of my speaking events, you've probably heard me talk about Bob Evans. That is a prime example. Sometimes the past and the present collide. We have fight, we have flight, we have freeze, and we have fawn. These can be really important survival responses. They aren't necessarily someone's personality. And there's another piece of this that took me a lot longer to understand. Familiar does not always mean healthy. If your nervous system spent years around chaos, unpredictability, and threat, calm can initially make you feel strange. This is why I think why I stayed in EMS as long as I did. The chaos, the adrenaline feeling, all of that is so familiar that I almost felt absent without it. It was so familiar that to have a regular job felt completely unpleasant. I found myself, and you can find yourself struggling to rest or be in quiet spaces. I used to have to sleep with the TV on. I used to have having the pager on open, just constant chaos, staying constantly busy. I could never sit down, waiting for something bad to happen. You're always anticipating problems, and you return to familiar relationship patterns. And that is why, because of my childhood, I repeated the cycles. I found the men who felt familiar. And to be in something normal felt so uncomfortable that I either left it or I created the chaos myself. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I wanted the chaos. It just meant that chaos felt familiar. It was home and all I ever knew. Healing can involve teaching our brains and bodies life is different now. And that has been really hard for me. And understanding that has changed the way I look at the previous versions of myself. The one that I don't want to hate her anymore. I want to understand her. There are versions of myself that I haven't been proud of. The woman who stayed too long. The woman who trusted the wrong people. The woman who reacted badly. The woman who coped in unhealthy ways. The woman who desperately wanted acceptance. The woman who worked herself into the ground, trying to prove her worth. For a long time, healing meant getting as far away from her as possible. I'm not her anymore. But I've also realized I don't have to hate her either. She knew what she knew. She had the tools she had. Sometimes, maybe a lot of times, she got things wrong, but she survived. I'm here today because of her trying to protect us. Maybe healing isn't standing over previous versions of ourselves and judging them with information they didn't yet have. Maybe it's sitting beside them and saying, I understand why you did that now. But then saying, but we don't have to do that anymore. And that second sentence matters because understanding cannot eliminate accountability. Two things can be true. My trauma can explain my previous behavior. And I am responsible for changing behavior that hurts myself or other people. I can understand why I struggle to trust and learn healthy relationships. I can understand why I people please and learn boundaries. I can understand why I became defensive and learn to listen. I can understand why I stayed and learn when it's time for me to leave. Trauma isn't an excuse to hurt people, but shame isn't a very good treatment plan either. Compassion without accountability can keep us stuck. Accountability without compassion can bury us in shame. Healing requires both. So there I was, standing in that room in Texas. I was standing there comparing everything I didn't have to everything everybody else had. But look at what I brought into that room. Decades of paramedic experience, lived experience, years of studying trauma and brain injury, years of speaking and training, years of surviving, healing, rebuilding, and learning. The ability to connect complicated concepts with real human experience. Different doesn't mean I'm less valuable. And then there was my appearance. Why was I worried about how I looked when my body isn't what brought me to Texas? My story did. My experience did. My knowledge did. My work did. My willingness to stand there and talk about the difficult things did. Maybe I didn't need another credential. Maybe I needed to recognize that I was already standing in that room. Here's what I would like us all to practice this week. If you catch yourself saying, "What is wrong with me?" or "What's going on?" or you start to think something is your fault, stop. Ask yourself, what happened to me? Where did I learn this response? What am I actually trying to protect myself from? Did this once help me? Is it helping me now? And finally, what would I like to learn instead? Maybe healing isn't fixing everything that's wrong with us. Maybe we're people who got hurt, people whose brains had to adapt, people whose nervous system learned to survive, people who made mistakes, people who sometimes carried survival responses from one chapter to another, even though they didn't belong. And now we get to learn something different. We don't have to hate ourselves into becoming healthier. We can look backward with compassion and forward with responsibility. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe there's simply more to your story than you've yet understood. Healing begins with understanding. I thank you guys for taking this journey with me. And for the people in Texas, thank you for giving me the space and meeting the versions of me over the last 20 years and welcoming her without shame. I appreciate you. If this episode made you think about something that you've spent years judging yourself for, share it with somebody who may need this message too. This week on my social medias, we're continuing this conversation and replacing shame with understanding without removing accountability. Because understanding why we became who we became doesn't mean that we have to stay there. We are allowed to learn something different. And that is the amazing part of the courageous journey. Thank you. And we'll see you next episode. Have an amazing day.